Hi everyone. In this video, we are going to build a Power Automate Cloud Flow that creates a post in Teams using a feature called an adaptive card. Adaptive cards have been around for a few years now, but many Power Automate users are still unaware of this feature, or at least unaware of how they can make a massive impact on their flows. I wanted to showcase adaptive cards in Teams while also presenting a great Cloudflow use case. You'll want to follow along so you can customize your own adaptive card to fit your Cloudflow needs. Let's get started. So I first want to show you that flow that we set up in a recent video. When a Salesforce high priority case is created, then it sends a notification with the case details to Teams. And I recently modified that flow so that instead of a regular post, it actually posts an adaptive card with a yes, no drop down option. And depending on the choice, there's a different action that happens upon selecting yes or no. And that's what this updated flow here is that you're looking at. So what happens is sends a card to Teams when that case is created, and that card looks like this. So we have in a chat channel in Teams, we've got the case summary, the link to the case details, and then you have this question here, reassign to coordinator queue. That's asking the user if they want to reassign this case based on the details they see here. No is the default answer, and if they click submit in this flow, nothing happens. But if they click yes, which they can toggle to here and click submit, then the case will get reassigned to the coordinator queue. So there's a condition that will do an action based on what is selected here. So we're going to set up something similar today, except we're not going to set up a flow with the trigger, because for testing, we're just going to create an instant cloud flow. So let's go ahead and jump right into that. I'm going to use the manually trigger a flow action, and we'll just call this card priority case, and we'll go ahead and create. First thing that I want to do is set up my trigger. Because this is a manual trigger, I want to add an input, and my input is going to be Salesforce case ID. And I already have a random case ID that I've selected for testing. So I'm going to paste that in the box here. Now, my next step is going to be Salesforce action. And it's going to be a get record. So I'm going to click see more and select get record. And for the cases, for the object type, it's going to be cases. And then the record ID is going to be the record ID field from, or case ID, excuse me, field from our trigger. So that's going to populate with whatever we input at the start of the flow. And I'm going to change this to, say, case, so we know what kind of record it's getting. Now, the next action that we need is the adaptive card action. So if we just type in adaptive card, we should see some Microsoft Teams actions here. And the one that we want to work with today is the post adaptive card and wait for a response, because the flow is going to run when the record gets created, or in this case, it's a manual flow, but in our final flow, when the record gets created, it's going to post the adaptive card in Teams, and then the flow is going to pause until a response has been received So once we actually in Teams, from Teams, select yes or no and click submit, then it will run the rest of the flow. So we need to set up some details of this action. I'm going to post as flowbot. One thing to keep in mind is that you do not have the ability here to post as a user. So in order for this to work in Teams, you're going to need to post to a public channel, because as a user, you can post to a private channel as long as you are a member or an owner of that channel. But as a Flowbot, and you only have two options, Flowbot or Power Virtual Agents. So selecting Flowbot, you can only post inside a public channel. Otherwise, this flow will not work. Now you need to go ahead and select your channel and then your team and your channel. Once you've selected all of those, you'll notice there's one more required field, and that would be the message. So what are we supposed to post in here? Well, this is the cool part. What we're posting in here is actually JSON. And JSON code will result, in the adaptive card that you see over here. So this code behind this is JSON, and I'm able to also put in some dynamic content into the code so that I can populate, for example, the link to the case here. And these items here, case summary, case details, which are the dynamic content of our get record action. So how do we do that exactly? Well, there is a website that we're going to hop over to, and that's going to show us how to create. So the website here is adaptivecards.io//designer. There's already an adaptive card here. And before you actually get to the designer page, if you don't want to just go in here and click create new card and select blank card, what you can do is choose from some templates. And to do that, you click on the samples up here at the top. And then you can see all these samples that they give you off to the side here. So that can be quite useful. For what we're doing today, I'm just going to go ahead and do a new card. And you'll also notice that there's a host app up here, and you can select Microsoft Teams. So I'm going to select Microsoft Teams and then create a blank card. You can also select the theme, light or dark. I'm going to start by adding text blocks. And I'm going to drag it over 3 text blocks. First text blocks that I want is one for our Salesforce case summary. And then the next one would be our link to case. And then the last one would be our case details. And then we also need some choice. So we want to have that toggle. The question that we had was reassigned to coordinator queue, and they can choose yes or no. So the input choice set is going to be the one that we want. Now you'll notice that as we drag these elements and inputs over into the card, the JSON is being updated down here in the card payload editor, and you can actually edit this text down here. So if you've never worked with JSON before, it's totally fine. This is a good opportunity to learn how the JSON code works. But the way it's set up in this adaptive cards designer is that I can select this new text blocks here. And then if I go over to the right-hand side, I'll see element properties, and I can modify things from over here without having to go into the code and change anything. So one thing that I need to do is set an ID. So I'm going to set an ID, and I'm going to call this AC, which stands for adaptive card. And I'll just do dot, and then I'll do case summary. I'm going to do case summary just like that. So I know that this is the spot where the case summary is going to be. And if you notice that as I put in the ID here, it updated the JSON code down here with an ID. And now if I select the next text block, I'm going to do the same exact thing. And this one is linked to case. So I'll just do AC and then case URL. And then the third one is going to be AC case details. And again, these IDs help us to know which dynamic content we're going to put where. But there's another reason that we want to put in ID, and it's for this choice because we're going to work with a condition that's going to require us to have a ID in here. And so for this one, this is going to be the question we assign. Now we need to actually put in some more information here. So I want this to be a required field, so they must. And you'll notice that required input should have a label. So we need to put in a label here. And the label is going to be our question. So our question is to the user, reassign to coordinator Q. And you'll see that it puts that label right here. And then the next thing is we can add our choices. So choice one, it's going to be no, and then no. Choice two is going to be yes, and then yes. Now we also want to have a default value set because most of the time, the user are not going to select yes, they're going to be selecting no. So I'm going to set the default value as no. And then you'll also notice that required inputs should have an error message. So we need to also put in an error message here because we're making this required. Please select an option. So if they don't and they try to submit, they will be shown the error message, please select an option. Okay, this looks pretty good. So I think we're going to go ahead and be done here. So the next thing we need to do before going back to Power Automate is we need to copy this code here. And what you can do is the button at the top, copy card payload. Go ahead and click that. We'll go back and we're going to paste in that JSON payload right into here. And this code is going to create that adaptive card post in Teams. We want to modify this JSON code with some dynamic content. So for our case summary, we're going to put the dynamic content right where it says text. So new text block, we're going to remove that. And we're going to put dynamic content summary. The next one is the case URL. Now that's a little bit more of a tricky one. We need to first create our URL. So to do that, I'm going to add in a new action up above the card. And it's going to be called Compose. And I'm going to rename this to Compose linked case. What I need is the URL from Salesforce. So this is the URL from Salesforce. And then I need to replace this ID with the dynamic content of our trigger. So I'm going to go to ID. There we go. Now we have our URL. And if I go back here, we can build our URL in the code here. Now, the URL is not always so straightforward to create in JSON. If I simply just remove this and I put in the outputs of our link to case compose, it's not going to create a clickable link. It will just put the text that you see right here. And that's obviously not helpful because you would have to copy and paste that into your browser. So to create a link using JSON, we're going to have to do a little bit more. So in my example, the link that you saw here is the case number. So if I click that and you can see my mouse is hovered over it, you can see where it's going to take you. I want to do that. So what I do for that is in the brackets, I'm going to put a bracket. I'm going to use dynamic content of the get record case. And what I want is the case number. And then I close out the bracket. And now I do a parenthesis here. And on the other side of my outputs, one more parenthesis. That is how you create the link using JSON. Now, the last thing that we need is the case details. Now, one thing that you want to note for this is that if I simply put in here the dynamic content for case details, I'm going to search for it here. It's not really going to work. In fact, it will throw an error. If you try to run this with the details just like it is there with the dynamic content, it's going to throw an error. So what you need to do to work around that is a simple action up above, which is an HTML to text action. So let's add that action, HTML to text. This is a content conversion connector. And in the content field, you're going to do dynamic content and then case details. Now that's going to convert that HTML of the case details to text. So we can go ahead and rename this to case details so we know what this is for. Go back to our adaptive card action. I'm going to clear out details and I'm going to add in the output of the HTML to text action. Now your flow will run and show you the case detail as you need to see them. So let's go ahead and test this flow and see what we get. So I'm going to save. Test. And you remember, since we're testing this as a manual with a manual trigger, you're going to need a record ID for a case. Paste in your ID and run flow. So now our flow ran these actions, and you can see here, this one hasn't run yet because it's not finished. It's waiting for our response. So if we open Teams and oh, look at this. We're sorry, this card couldn't be displayed. So it looks like we have a little bit of an error here. So we need to go back and probably make some modifications here to figure out why that can't be displayed. I know the issue, but if you run into this, the issue is actually has a very simple solution. When you see that message, and I went back into edit and I click on my adaptive card, the solution is in the version down here in our JSON code. Version 1.5, for whatever reason, is not going to show you that. So if you go to the designer adaptive cards here and you're working in here, you'll see in the upper right corner target version, you need to change that to 1.4. So from 1.5 to 1.4. I can just change it here in the code. 1.4 should work now. Let's give it a try. It's good to see this trial and error stuff, this troubleshooting stuff. So let's test. run flow. Teams, and there we go. We can see it. Now you'll notice that um, there's nothing here, no text to indicate what this is. So we see like this random text, but what we want to have in front of this is something to indicate that this is the case summary, this is the case number, and it's also a link to the case, and this is the case details. We do have this working correctly, so we can toggle between yes and no. There's also no submit button, so there's no way for me to do anything further here. So we need to do a couple things. We need to add in our labels for these items here, and we need to add a submit button. So I'm going to go back into the designer, and from the designer here, I need to add in a button. So if I click on the card itself, there's this thing that says add an action. If I click on that, I can add a submit button here where it says action.submit. So I added that and I click on that to open the element properties over here, and I can set an ID. So I'll just do AC submit, and I can change the title. So instead of it saying action.submit, it will just say submit. And we also change the target version. What I'm going to do is I'm going to copy everything that exists after this last text box here. So I'm going to copy that part. I'm going to go into here, go up here and paste this. And now I have my button there. And the additional thing that I want to add is that text. So here is where I'm going to put in summary. And then here is where I will put link to case. And then here is where I will put case details. All right, that looks great. So let's go ahead and save again. Give it a run. Waiting so we can open up Teams. And now we can see everything on the card looks right. We have our summary, our link to case. We can see it created the URL. We have our case details, and now we have the question, and we can actually select an option and click submit. So I'm just going to go ahead and choose anything. You'll notice that you can clear this out and you'll see placeholder text. That's something that we can also change in the code. But if I don't select an option and it gives me the default no and I click submit, it'll work. So everything worked, but we want to do one last thing. And that one last thing is going to be in our next video. So we're going to end this video here, but in the next video, we're going to add a condition. Depending on what the user selects, if they select yes, it'll run some additional action, which is of course the reassign action. And if they select no, it's actually going to do something further in Salesforce. So you want to keep an eye out for that video. When it drops, I'll make sure to link that video to this video here. Otherwise, you'll want to stay tuned for when that video releases so that you know how to add a condition. So thanks again for watching. And as always, we'll see you in that next video. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.